Matthews and Crow do a good job of explaining that a difference is not a deficit. An ability grouping of students creates a particular teacher expectation over time and plays a significant role in determining, how much and how well students learn. And many of you may be familiar with, tracking your students and or being that teacher where you do have tracked students. I know for myself, mine are always tracked. You can always figure out the pattern of teachers that those kids have had based on their ability and disability. And part of this cultural proficiency continuum is to ensure that the tracking doesn't occur and students aren't just being kind of molded and not molded, but kind of tracked in this certain pattern with certain kids where then assumptions are made about those children. Oh, this whole group came from this teacher, therefore they all must be dyslexic. When really, 4 of them might be and the rest of them may just struggle in writing, for example. So in order to not have that, you need to kind of create this culturally proficient school, and therefore within your context of those PLCs, all the things that I just named in the continuum will help to kind of resolve and dissolve what you see, such as tracking and homogeneous grouping. Okay, in looking at types of diversity, there's racial, there's ethnic, and there's cultural diversity. And in this textbook and in this chapter, there is a man who devised 4 approaches, and they're referenced as Banks's 4 approaches. And so I'm going to kind of go into some detail about that. But first of all, we all know that the melting pot idea of our country, it's this idea that ethnic differences were melted into a single pot and they would produce like this synthesis and a new homogeneous culture. This is a metaphor, though, that the book says, has never been accurate in the United States. So then these 4 approaches were developed and need to be considered when developing a multicultural curriculum on your campuses. And the first approach is called the contribution approach, where the curriculum includes content about holidays and celebrations of various ethnic groups. The second approach is the additive approach. It uses the curriculum to add content about minorities without changing the basic goals and structure of the curriculum. The transformative approach is where there's changes in the basic assumptions of the curriculum, and it enables students to view concepts, issues, themes, and problems from different perspectives. And lastly, Banks's 4th approach would be the social action approach. Once students have studied an issue and drawn their own conclusions, then they should be able to take their personal experiences and their social and create a social and civic action plan. So it kind of takes you through the different models and the different processes of learning in being inclusive and kind of addressing all the racial, ethnic, cultural types of diversity, and how we can, in our schools, teach effectively to address all types of diversity. Another type of diversity that we are going to look at is religious diversity. Religious diversity is a big type. We studied this a lot in our law class, and there are several cases, such as the School District of Arlington Township versus Schempp, and the Murray versus Curlett case, which stated that the state is firmly committed to a position of neutrality. A couple of scenarios that I found interesting in the book on page 122 is Matthews and Crow give you some school and classroom practices that have conflicted with religious beliefs. And just for example, number 1 says Muslim students having to go to the cafeteria during lunch even though they were fasting during Ramadan. Or Hindu children having to participate in Easter egg painting and hunting. Although most educators understand this concept of separation of church and state, especially regarding prayer and Bible study, the issues are more confusing when it comes to the classroom and practices such as the examples I just provided. The rulings of these cases, do not prevent educators from including religious thought and practices in the curriculum to reflect a multicultural society. To completely remove religion from the curriculum is to limit student understanding in such areas of history, music, and literature. So therefore, sometimes it's kind of a gray area and a fine line. The misunderstanding of the court rulings did lead to wrongful practices in classrooms, and they also give you some examples of those, such as students were told that they could no longer assemble for morning prayer, circle in the common area, a student's told not to offer silent prayer before eating lunch. And again, as we all know, when you get religion involved, it really creates a lot of angst, disagreement, and like I said, a very gray area and a very fine line. Another type of diversity that chapter 6 hones in on is language diversity. You know, a lot of us have ELL or English language learners or bilingual students. And, you know, for educators, you know, one area of concern for us is often linked to kind of a racial and cultural diversity in language differences. There are 3 qualities that Matthews and Crow go into about 3 personal qualities that social workers and psychologists and educators have used in building relationships with those who speak a different culture to kind of help mainstream them. And that's warmth, empathy, and geniusness. That's the ability to be authentic or be real. You know, when we're warm, we can communicate to students and parents both verbally and non-verbally. You know, empathy involves being in tune with how the students feel and walking in their shoes and really kind of putting yourself in their position. You know, if we go to another country and we're in school in another country, you know, obviously it's easy for us to think about. But then when we come back and our actions and what we're doing, are we really being empathetic? Are we really putting ourselves in the learner's shoes? You know, poverty and social class is another factor. Educational researchers have indicated that, you know, it's just that a statistically significant relationship exists between poverty and academic achievement. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this either, because we have studied this in our diversity class, and it really just kind of re-highlights how, you know, what goes on at home and how, you know, people's financial means affects in their social class affects their learning environment. Gender differences and issues in education are not new either. Those are also factoring into diversity in schools, as well as student sexual orientation. You know, there's a lot of discrimination that exists with sexual orientation among students and parents, and it's become one of those most controversial areas in our society and in our schools. Students with special needs, again, another highly complex factor in all of this in education. You know, the inclusion programs and resource programs, and do we pull them out, or do we, are we inclusive and keep them in and treat them, like everybody else, just at their level? Those are all still up for debate. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act really changed life for special ed children. And under these laws, each student is classified with every student that is classified with a disability has to have an individual educational plan, an IEP. And this law requires that the local education agencies and the school and the child's parents and guardians, are all joint in developing the IEP, and again, giving everybody in the situation a voice. Gifted and talented students, it's interesting because on my campus we have a really huge push for GT students right now, because we do have so much personnel and attention towards our special education program on our campus. But gifted and talented students are on the other end of the spectrum. Oftentimes people don't see GT children as special ed. Well, they are. They do require special educational plan. They do require an individualized education plan. And so it's important that as advocates, part of our role as an advocate is advocating for all learners being gifted and talented. Oftentimes when we're really focused on the special education children, it becomes the average kids and those gifted kids kind of can start falling between the cracks, or just not reach their greatest potential, and they're not thriving as they could if we were giving, their programming as much attention. Students placed at risk. That's another term that we use in education. It's been, it's sometimes thrown around as, kids are at risk. Well, at risk can mean a lot of different things. We can be at risk, at the poverty level, ethnicity-wise, language-wise, grade-wise. Another factor in this chapter is looking at, as a principal, being an advocate for your school. That's through multi-educational programs. Do you have multi-ethnic study courses? Do you have mono-ethnic courses? Do we have multi-ethnic education and multicultural education? Bilingual education is another avenue and another program that we need to look into. Regardless of the program that your school uses or the ones that you want to develop as the administrator, we need to be aware of the following. We need to use various instruments in the selection process that do not rely solely on one measure. Be aware that performance on intelligence and achievement tests is often influenced by children's socioeconomic status. Intelligence isn't fixed. Increase learning opportunities for disadvantaged children and minority children with outstanding talents. Emphasize teacher development and work with parents and community members in providing opportunities for students. In order to be an advocate for our students, we have to first be an advocate for ourselves. We need to be an advocate for the community. We need to value what they have to say. We need to educate them and give them the resources and the knowledge that the community needs to help support us as schools, as school institutions. Then there's that leveraging factor. Being an advocate for the community also involves leveraging the community for the good of the students and making sure that even though you don't agree, you solely know what's best. You're always going to get a diverse outlook on things and proponents and people that are completely for you and then people that are completely against you. But at the end of the day, as a facilitator of others' advocacy, we have to be, it all goes back to, are we doing what's best for all students? Regardless if you agree or disagree, is it what's best for all students? And as we move into the critical role of the leader in the next chapter, it's going to continue to build on these ideas and principles. So, in conclusion, as a principal, as advocate, there's a lot of information in this chapter, but it really goes back to diversity, equity, inclusiveness, and equality for all. And if we as leaders know who we are and we really face some of these tough questions on a personal level, then we're more open, apt, and knowledgeable and willing to address those same concerns and needs on our campuses and to help our colleagues support our communities in being an inclusive and equal environment. If there's anything that you take away from chapter 6, I want you to visualize and think about a bridge. As an advocate, you as the leader of the school community have to bridge and create a walkway and a pathway to connect you and your visions to the students, the parents, the community members, the naysayers, and everybody else out there in your community. In order to have a shared vision within the community, you have to be that person to bridge. Children learn by watching their teachers, their parents, and the civilians, the people in our societies. And if we as leaders don't create a safe environment and a place where children can watch and learn to accept differences and to work with people that are different than themselves with different points of view, then we're never going to be able to form that bridge. Schools need to support cultural differences by helping the parents, the teachers, and the students model democracy in our societies. Schools under our leadership can be the change agents. We have to be the change agents and make local communities ethically and socially just for everybody.